All right, we'll call the meeting to order of the monthly Bartlett Regional Hospital Board of Directors meeting. It's Tuesday, May 28th, and we are starting a little bit late at 5:35. Rita, would you do the land acknowledgement for us?
Be happy to. Good afternoon to the Quentin, Haida, and Fairfield people. We respectfully acknowledge them as the original inhabitants of Southeast Alaska. Bartlett Regional Hospital is located on the homelands of the Fawn. We are grateful to provide services in your ancestral homeland and to be part of the community.
Thank you very much. And we have a roll call.
James Cohn. Max Wertz.
Here.
Dr. Rester.
Here.
Lisa Peterson.
I'm sorry, here.
Al Geiger. Dr. Jones.
Here.
Kelly Gearing.
Here.
Matt Johnston. Here. Katie Solomon Gross.
Here. Thank you, Anita. And in the room, we have our CEO and our chief of staff, and we have lots of other staff in the room. All of our chiefs are able to accept the go on to the approval of the agenda, Max.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just by virtue of the importance of the item, I'd move that we move item number 10 be number 4, the sustainability decision point recovery plan up in the agenda. And you're aware, I suggest maybe up in number 8 somewhere, just to get a little bit higher up, get a little quicker.
So if it's okay with you, I'd like to move under number 10, item B, all of them, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we don't have this confused here. So I'll move it right under 8, right after new business. So it'll be kind of like C. Number 10 will come. 10 will come where 9 should be, and 9 will go where 8 is.
Good.
I'll second. As amended.
See no objections? The agenda is approved with the changes. Public participation. We have 3 people signed up. Just a quick reminder that each person will have 3 minutes to speak tonight. After you get done speaking, the board won't really be engaging in conversation with you, but there will be some questions possibly just to make sure that we have good clarification. So we'll do that. And our first person is Mary Ann, is that right?
Mary Allison.
Mary Allison. State your name and where you're from.
No problem. I'm not going to speak that long, because someone will tell me when it's close to 3 minutes. My name is Mary Alice McKean. I live at 212 West 9th Street, Juneau, Alaska, and I've lived here since 1978. I'm coming because I read this article in the Empire. And the first thing I want to do is thank Mark Sabatini for writing this article and the many other articles he's written. He's single-handedly keeping us all informed, and I just really want to thank you. I've never met you, but thank you. The title of this article is Bartlett Regional Hospital Looking at Eliminating or Trimming 6 quote non-core unquote programs to stabilize finances. And all of the programs are worthwhile, but the program that touched me, and I was shocked, not shocked, but very surprised to hear hospice referred to as a non-core program. My opinion is that hospice is a core function of any healthcare system, particularly one serving a town of 30,000 people. Everyone is born and everyone dies. And the process of dying is a fundamental, often sacred, very deep process for everyone involved, the dying person and their family. And people need specialized help to go through this. You need a medical system to help the dying person with pain relief, to help the family understand what's happening. It's a natural process and it's a difficult process, but it doesn't have to be a traumatic process. But hospice is what really enables the process to be, for many people, not everyone, but for many people, to be something that is meaningful and as I said, as less traumatic as possible. When surveyed, 71% of Americans feel that, quote, helping people die without pain, discomfort, and stress is the most important aspect of end-of-life healthcare. And furthermore, the same number, about 71%, would prefer to die in the comfort of their own home. And I was really disturbed when the hospice program closed, and I was really relieved when the hospital took it on. I'm not, as far as I know, gonna be needing hospice anytime soon, but when I do, or when my husband does, or when any member of the community does, I really think it's essential that this option is available. So I just ask you to do what you can to determine how to continue this core function of a healthcare system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any board members have any? Thank you for coming today. We really appreciate hearing your thoughts. I want you to know that part of today, we're going to be talking about how us as a board is going to be reaching out to the community to hear what they think of different services that Bartlett answers or provides, and what's the best for our community. So thank you for coming.
And I just want to thank everyone on the hospital board for being willing to take on this difficult job.
Luke? Yeah, come sit up in the window. And then just tell us your name and where you're from, your first and last name.
So my name is Luke McArthur-Jones. I am a Juneau resident as of the last 6 years. I'm originally from London. I spent my whole life working in the public, working for the public. I started off at a gastroenterology ward for a couple of years, attending people who were in a very poor way or dying, and I watched people die from substance use. I just want to briefly speak to advocate for the public importance of organizations such as the Rainforest Recovery Center. I don't speak as a staff member, I speak as just myself. I am a person who picks up the phone talking to people from all over the state. I understand that there are many people in Anchorage who call me saying, hey, I've heard of you guys down in Juneau because you treat people so well. And I know that we are one of the few entities of this type that really give people that feeling of passion and compassion that drives them onto their next goals. I know that I fully acknowledge that there are financial realities that affect Bartlett, that affect Juneau, hence the focus from the documentation on Juneau residents ending Rainforest Recovery Center. I want to just emphasize two small details. First of all, we are the only 3.5 level facility in Southeast Alaska. I know that's been clarified. I'm not an expert on such matters, but I think it's important to note that being a high intensity residential facility, we can attend to a level of need that the other places in Southeast Alaska just don't and can't. And they get sent either up north or down south, and we hope they come back to their home communities. At the same time, we're the only facility of this type in Alaska that can do such short-term programs for weeks. That for lots of people is the difference of them being going to rehab or not, or just not doing it at all. I've spoken to several people in the last few weeks who either have told me that they could only come because it was just a month, they could get a month out of work and not lose their job, not lose their home, not be homeless when they are otherwise housed. And I know the gentleman that I spoke to just 2 weeks ago, he told me he's hoping to come in August because that's when he can get a month out of his life. And I know, of course, that financial realities are the be all and end all, but I think I just want to add a bit of that nuance to the conversation of what the Rainforest Recovery Center does for Juneau and for Alaska. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any board members have any questions? Thank you again, and again, on behalf of the board, we appreciate you coming in and commenting and look forward to hearing more hopefully during the next month or so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have a hand up?
Yeah, I'm gonna take up the list here first and then we'll go there. Yeah. Brittany McCarthy, is that correct? Hi, how are you? So Brittany, just have a seat and tell us who you are. In 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Brittany McCarthy. I'm from Juneau, born and raised, Juneau life. Not a great public speaker. But I'm also here to advocate for the Rainforest Recovery Program. It is something that is vital to our community. And I think that even though the hospital is facing a massive budget crisis right now, the Rainforest Recovery Program is saving lives. And it's vitally important in the state that is facing a crisis in this area. So I just wanted to come and say that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. And again, too, we appreciate you coming here. And we'll go online and we'll start with Mr. Johnson. Mark, good to see you.
Hi, thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to say I benefited from the hospital services here just recently, and thanks to Dr. Jones and many other staff. And I think I got very good treatment, and you may have seen my letter in the newspaper about that. But the other reason I wanted to address all of you was just in regard to this behavioral health issue, which I think many of you know I've spent a lot of years on working toward improvements. And I understand the need for financial sustainability. I think I had a pretty good track record when I was on the board, keeping track of that kind of an issue. But one of the things that, first of all, I hope that you don't make any quick decisions. I hope you can plan for either ways to try to keep these programs financially sustainable, or at least give time for others in the community to look at alternatives. And I have a lot of thoughts on that we don't have time for right now. But one of the things that I remember from serving on the board is typically we lost money in the winter and we made money in the summer with the tourist season. So as we're entering the summer tourist season, my assumption is that pattern will continue and might give you a little bit more time, at least, I don't know what your time frame is at this point, but at least give you a little more time to figure out how these programs can be sustained. You know, I chaired that recruitment committee for your hospital for about 5 years, and it was, one of our priorities was recruiting psychiatrists. It was always, sometimes difficult. And we have a pretty good cadre of providers now in the community, and I hope we don't make decisions where we lose them and then have to rebuild all that all over again. So, my appeal is, I agree, we need to make programs financially sustainable, but let's give it some time to plan for, so we can continue these programs in one way or another. And one of my emphasis, of course, was on the kids. And I said from the day I first got on the hospital board that we provided a lot of and back then behavioral health services for adults, but not so much for kids. And I was pleased that we were doing a lot more for kids. The other thing I'll close with is, you know, if people in the community don't get these services, and I can guarantee you, if they have to go elsewhere to get them, a lot of them just won't get them. The entire community is affected by it. And it's not just short term. And I can tell you from experience, it can be decades of impacts in many different ways, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's crime, you know, domestic violence, you name it. So we critically need these services. So anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. And again, too, if you stay on this meeting, you're going to hear a little bit of our timeline and how we're not going to make rash decisions and really make sure that we do a lot of community outreach too. But thank you, Mr. John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Cindy A. Cindy, tell us your name and where you're from.
I am Cindy Audette. I live in North Douglas at 10637 Horizon Drive. Been in Juneau for 42 years. Gonna just read my testimony. I'm here to show my support for non-core services. I was confused by the article in the Empire saying that some non-core services might get cut due to lack of financial sustainability. I worked in the pharmacy in this hospital for 30 years. I accepted that my department was what I believe the administration called a cost center. Its revenue was used to support non-revenue producing departments. I assume that's still the way things work. I believe the city operates that way, using general funds to support programs that don't generate enough on their own to sustain themselves. So in the past, breaking even wasn't a criteria for whether a service was needed or not. The community, in my opinion, this community needs hospice. This community needs crisis stabilization and residential mental health treatment. The decision to provide these services was based on and supported by current clinical practice guidelines for delivery of those services in the most effective and compassionate way possible. I hope we can find a way to sustain delivery of these important services. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Cindy. Does anybody have any questions for the board for Cindy? Thank you very much. Anybody here from the public want to participate or speak today anymore? Dr. Urata, so good to see you.
Good to see you. I didn't intend to come back, but here I am.
So tell us who you are.
Things like chairs confuse me now. My name is Bob Urata. I'm been in Juneau since 1984, I think. And been a physician and have also been a hospice medical director since 87 until 20. And I want to speak in a good word for hospice. I think it's something that makes Juneau a better community. We give birth, we in our hospital, we birth babies. They start out their lives and we have a hospice program now to help ease them into whatever comes next, either the next life or whatever you believe in. And I think our hospice program has been outstanding and has taken care of people. What helps to pay for hospice now is home care. And that's why we started home care and hospice at the same time, because in the old days, hospice didn't pay for itself. But now with home care, it helps offset the bills. And now, of course, Medicare hospice provides some reimbursement. I know that you folks find yourself in a very tough position financially, and you have to make tough decisions. But I would put in a good word for hospice as something that can help keep this hospital one of the best in Alaska. And and also help the community, which is the goal of our hospice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Urata. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Urata? Anybody else from the public like to speak? Next up on our agenda is the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'd second that.
Thank you. Seeing no objections, the consent agenda is approved. We'll go on to old business with the McDonald.
So our hospital capacity updates, currently we have one COVID patient in Bartlett. There are 6 COVID patients in Wildflower Court as residents. And then we have 4 employees out with COVID. That includes 3 from Wildflower Court. Patient day CCU 82, med surg 321, mental health unit 223. They currently have a census of 10. OB 53, nursery 41. ED saw 916 patients last month. RC currently has a census of 12, correct? And Aurora Behavioral Health, I think, has a census of 1, and they have had 24 patient days since they opened. We have several awaiting. We have 2 adolescent psych patients waiting on our med surg floor. 1 will possibly be received in a few days, and 1 is still waiting for placement. We have 3 subacute rehab patients waiting. 1 should go to Wildflower Court today. Another 1 is awaiting funding, and another 1 is waiting for acceptance at a facility. And then we have 4 long-term care patients, which have a little bit more complicated needs, and they're all waiting. We don't have any supply issues. Our staffing's been a little tight. We've had some employee call-ins, but the house suits are doing a great job, and the director is making kind of things work. And then I will let Kim Stout give you the census for Wildflower Court, home care, hospice, and her report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. McDowell. Any questions?
So I missed that. So you're saying the census is 10 on med surg, or is the census 10 somewhere else?
On mental health,
What's the census on med surg?
I will have to look. I think when I looked earlier, they were 24.
Good thing. That's pretty much a high, isn't it, Kim, on mental health?
Pretty high.
I think, as you know, we were budgeting 10. Getting that quantity, right?
And I should say one more thing. We do have 4 1-to-1s in-house, and that does affect staff.
On med surg. All right, I don't see any more questions for you, Kim. Thank you very much. Discuss.
Thank you. It sounds like nothing's happening with the CEO search, but there's a lot going on right now. We currently, just to let you know, we currently have 39 candidates that have submitted their applications. 3 of them currently reside in Alaska and 2 others with ties to Alaska. Right now, we're advertising on Becker's, which is a platform for hospital administrators and board members and others. Becker's, LinkedIn, Indeed, and our current websites. Right now, what's happening is we have a staff committee that's reviewing and doing the initial screen to make sure that the minimum qualifications have been met that we as a board have identified that we want to, that we're looking for in our candidates. They're going through that process. I think they've completed that process with the candidates that we have on hand. They're about to schedule screening interviews. The first interview that will happen with those candidates, the screening committee will complete those in a couple of weeks.
And then the heavy lifting for our committee will begin. We're both the staff screening committee and the search committee are searching for times that will work for everyone. So for those of you that are on the committee and for the board in general, we'll let you know. Those meetings have been scheduled. Once we, let's see, we are on pace with our target scheduling. So I feel really good about that. And let's see if there's anything else I missed in my notes. I think that's it for this update. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Excellent, thank you. Okay, go on to new business. First new business is we have an action item, provided fitness policy, and can go over this with us.
Mr. Chair. So Brett Regional Hospital recently become aware of a pending legal case involving Young Haven Hospital in Connecticut, and there are over 70 fitness policy for providers. The court is expected to rule on that sometime soon. And Bartlett has a similar medical staff policy that was created in 2012. So our suggestion, and I heard this with the chief of staff as well, and he's in agreement, is that we suspend the enforcement of the med staff policy on the provider fitness for all providers pending the outcome of the lawsuit with the Young Haven.
Yeah, could you just briefly summarize what does the fitness policy say?
And Dr. Malter, I may call on you. My understanding is I bring it with me, I should have, is that once a provider turns 70, then they need to go through and pay for their own medical screening and their own medical fitness eval, say that they are okay to resume their duties as a provider.
So it's strictly an age issue. It's not fitness having to do with substance abuse.
Well, I think it's fitness in general, so could be make sure their eyes are good if they're a radiologist, or make sure, all of those things they can still.
Lisa, and then Dr. Astor.
Why was the policy put in place in 2012?
That is a great question. I don't know if you know the history.
I think 10 years ago, there were some physicians on staff who we simply who were getting to be over 70. And the general medical staff thought it was appropriate just to kind of confirm that their cognitive ability was as good as it had been. So it was put in for those reasons. I think a lot of places have had these policies for a number of years. So our policy wasn't really unusual. But as Kim suggested, now they're being questioned a little bit to make sure that they're not discriminatory. And as that's being, and I think it's been in the court for a number of years, but it seems prudent at this point to just hold off on enforcing using it until courts make the final decision. The only reason it's coming up here is because this was one of the policies that did make it to the board. So rather, Kim approached the medical staff about just unilaterally putting it on pause. And my preference was, since it was at one point ratified by the board, I would prefer that the board put it on pause since you guys asked us to do it.
And Dr. Malter, so it was the med staff came to the board and asked for this policy to put in place. So the board ratified this in 2012 at the med staff's recommendation.
Yes,
correct?
that's completely correct. Maybe I said that. What I meant is, once it's approved by the board, from my perspective, it's a hospital board policy and it no longer belongs to the med staff.
I just wanted to
Yes.
to make sure that we as a board here did what the med staff recommended for us to do.
Yeah, that's completely correct. Yes.
Dr. Astor.
Oh, just to support that, I agree with Dr. Malter that the timeline is correct. There were some issues about cognitive decline. We were a little worried about some judgment. And like other hospitals, we had put that in place. To my knowledge, it has not really been used against anybody that I can think of in the past 10, 12 years. And so we're just following the national recommendation. And if it is to pause, then I support pausing.
Thank you, Dr. Reister.
I'm just a little bit curious, are there many practitioners, seventies used to be pretty old, it seemed like to me. Now it doesn't seem that bad. Are there many practitioners, are there many practitioners who are older, right?
Through the chair, I don't know the number of practitioners over, but keep in mind that this all goes through credentialing, so it's any type of ancillary, any type of locums, those kind of folks.
I can pitch in. I think I can think of a half a dozen providers that are very sharp and that are in their 70s. I think 80 is about the top of it.
Any other questions? So we do have an action item and should I take the motion?
Sure. I move the Board of Directors of Butler Regional Hospital suspend the enforcement of the medical staff provider fitness policy for all providers pending the outcome of the Yale New Haven Hospital case.
Chairman, I'd second that.
Second. Do we have any discussion on this? No objections. Thank you. Next, item of new business. CEO mid-year review and contract action item, and we're gonna let Mr. Brown talk about this. Chad?
Thank you so much. This is Chad Brown, Executive Director. So there's two components to this particular memo. So first and foremost is the mid-year review for the CEO. So with this, along with this memo, you'll find an attachment that includes the CEO's report card, which is something that Mr. Warden put together that outlined his successes and his accomplishments so far, as well as the mid-year review form for the board. So what we're doing here is giving both the board as well as senior leadership an opportunity to provide input and review of Mr. Warden's performance. And so what will happen is these documents will be shared with those groups to provide their feedback by June 18th. That will give me time to aggregate the scores and the comments into one discussion document that can be discussed at its most performance-free for an executive session at the June 25th meeting. So any questions on that part? Pretty simple process. We've all done this before. Yeah.
The thing that struck me as I looked through it, some of the things that are on there really are more applicable to a CEO who's been here for a long term. And Mr. Warden's been here very short term. And I just thought there was maybe a little bit of problem with evaluating on things that require long term.
I believe that what we're trying to do here is to, and a lot of this too also is at Mr. Ward's request. Okay, so we want to give him a mid-year review. This is actually kind of a starting point. As you go through these documents and you are to rate Mr. Warden, if you don't feel you have enough data to do that, just write on that on the form. Okay, and I believe that you're right. A few of these are, is for a really a long-term person that's been in place, but I think we need a point, and he's asked for that too as well.
Thank you.
The document that is, I think it's, who did that? Did you do that, Chad?
Mr. Warden.
Ian did that, okay.
Yeah, that's basically his self-report card.
Oh, self-review, okay, thank you.
So in the past, this board has had the CEO do their evaluation on a form that we use. And then we kind of see what they've said about themselves, and then we've kind of gone in there and wrote it. So Mr. Warden kind of set this up for us. And this is in my way, it's a great metric to show where he's at. And this is something that working with Lisa and with Chad too, I believe that this will be something going in the future that we're going to be using going forward. With, of course, tweaks from the board as we see necessary. Any other questions on that?
The second part of this is, when Mr. Wharton was hired as the interim CEO, it was indicated that his position was going to be 3 to 4 months while we search for a new CEO. Given everything that's happened since then, and his willingness to extend through the end of the year, it is important that we look at that contract and make any amendments or adjustments as needed. So I would like to propose that the board authorize myself to work with the board chair to review the end of that contract.
Questions? Comments? So, first motion, you want to make a motion on it? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital authorize the Executive Director of the Human Services to review and amend the contract, including extending the time through the end of 2024. And I think you suggested that that be done in coordination with the board president.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Let's see, no objection. Oh, I'm sorry, next.
I was before getting my finger up there. Sorry about that. I just want to, in response to Ian's 6-month review. I mean, I think he's asking for it. I think it's it's a healthy thing. I like the fact that he's asking for it. I think I'm glad that we're going through that process. And I agree, Al, that there's some things on here that are kind of more long-term in nature, but it seems like it's a good thing to give them the feedback.
I'm glad too. I think that the one thing that Mr. Warden is bringing to the floor is he's really helping educate us on what with a CEO and their process, the evaluation process on everything is really, really helping us. So we appreciate that. Seeing no other further comments, objection, this motion's passed. And the next motion is board. We'd like to make it. Councilor McKellar. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was a single.
Sorry, just a single.
That's the one, wasn't it?
Yep. Let's go on to the.
Okay, so just to give a little background, we want to make sure that as an organization that we partner with the board to have your input and insight into any sort of structural changes that the organization can make. So as part of the ongoing phase of growth, to adapt to our market conditions and to enhance our operational efficiency, we are requesting that the board provide the CEO authorization to move forward with a sustainable organizational structure. And what that means is, to give more background, with leadership turnover, the organizational structure that Bartlett Hospital has is formidable to very dramatic, all of which create a level of uncertainty, not just with the leadership team, but with the staff. So you add that in addition to the acute financial and economic pressures, it necessitates a real hard look at our organizational structure. And I think the important piece to note here is that since I got here, I've been had this in my mind. I've been saying, what is the Bartlett way? What is the Bartlett way? What is something that is bigger and more sustainable than just the whim of a specific CEO that comes in and maybe changes things? And so really identifying best practices, what makes sense for our organization in perpetuity, so that we can build that structure in and own that as a leadership team. And so when Mr. Warden does move on to his next adventure, that these things are still in place and they're not as rattled by someone else coming in and rearranging the deck chairs. So in order to do that, there are several components, which is audit analysis. That has been taking place. That is something that Mr. Warden has been looking at, I believe, since he's gotten here. And defining our objectives for the transition process and to align our restructuring goals with our strategic plan. Everything has to start back at that strategic plan. Where are we trying to go? The organizational structure should reflect that. Of course, the planning and implementation and then the communication of that plan. So the next steps, there's a proposed motion below, we're seeking approval for organizational restructuring as outlined above. And what we would do is we would come back with a detailed plan for the July board meeting. So that would include all the specifics. I apologize, that is the June board meeting, July board meeting, so I apologize. Typo there, we'd be intending to come back with its organizational structure of the June board meeting.
Chad, any questions for Chad?
No.
Well, my only question is, I don't know why you need a motion. I mean, can't the CEO and you work together and do this without a motion? And I certainly want to say I appreciate you involving the board and letting us know.
That's a very good question, and the answer is yes. We do need a motion. CBJ ordinance 40010, which outlines what the administrator of the hospital to do, does specifically state that organizational structure is something that does need to be reviewed or approved by the board. There is an opportunity in other organizations to give authority to the CEO from the board. That's usually a written delegation where they would actually delegate that authority, and that with a written delegation, that would be an ongoing kind of as long as that person is in place, a board has authorized them to do what they need to do. So there'd be two ways to approach it, but at this point, we simply want to make sure that we have your authorization to continue to move forward with the phased approach that we've already taken, and to continue to build this sustainable structure so that we can have it in place for the future.
Mr. Chairman, then I would move the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital authorize the hospital CEO to work with staff to build a sustainable organizational structure to be presented in details and with final approval.
No. Second. Lisa? Any discussion? So I want to just ask a couple questions. So Chad, what you'll do in the June board meeting is you guys will come back to the board with a new org chart, basically kind of showing us where we're at. And then it'll be up to the board then to fully ratify that, correct? That's, as you and I have talked before, this is what the attorneys have told us to do because this is a CBJ code. So when we see this in June, if we're not happy with this, we can discuss it and that's it.
Mr. Chairman, I had 2 points. Mr. President. One, I think that even though I don't think that the administrative code is up to date, I think it behooves us to really follow it verbatim to make sure that we can do these sorts of things without concern with what we've done. Number two, as I've talked to Chad, what we need to do is explain the principles of what we're trying to achieve and to make sure that you understand that an organizational structure has to have and as Chad put it, an ability to move the organization forward in terms of its goals. So we'll put together a set of principles, we'll put together a set of information and then present that, tell you why we think this meets those principles. But it's important to note that organizational structure gets very, it can be a very touchy subject at this point in time. So we want to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's, especially with this code.
Seeing no other discussions and no objections, the solution is passed. Now we'll move on to our committee meeting minutes, because we're going to skip over and go to B, which will be our finance committee meeting minutes. Finance committee. So Max, we're going to start with you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there are the minutes are on page 31 of the packet. And of course, most of the discussion of the meeting was focused around sustainability employee document, which we'll be covering in more detail here in a minute, so I won't get into that. There were three other action items that were presented, and I'll just kind of go through them on a kind of overview, and then we can decide what level we want to go. The first one had to do with the tax imaging solution. And there's actually a lot of information in the packet about that. It starts on page 34 and goes back to, or 36 and goes back to page 60. And that is around an approval for replacement of that, or, you know, accepting their recommendation for which one we want to go through. The other two had to do with some administrative cleanup. And all three of those together are three action items that we're presenting to the board for action. So I thought I'd start off with the tax, and Kim, do you want to just give us kind of the high level overview on that, please?
Sure, Chair. So the current PAC system, which is the picture archiving communication system and diagnostic imaging, is at end of life and can no longer be updated or upgraded. So because of that, they conducted an evaluation of different PACs in the marketplace to determine what the best fit was. They came down to two viable options, which was Fuji and Agfa. Our current system, McKesson, was unable for us. So when they started looking at both of those programs, they felt like Fuji PACs was ranked higher, and it was a better technical fit for our department. Agfa really could require, my understanding, more applications and more add-ons than what Fuji would. So that's why they picked, and they're also rated best in class for PAC. So that's why we wanted to go with it. It also gives us the room to grow a little bit with the PAC system. So we can actually download pictures of wounds, of surgeries, anything like that into this archiving system.
Thank you, Kim. So there is an action item, so there's been a motion and it's been seconded through the committee. So this is time for any more discussion on this, any questions? All right, seeing no questions, discussion, or objections, this action item is passed. Back to you.
So the next item is, and it's on page 63 in the packet, so you have to go back quite a bit to get, or down quite a bit to get to it, and it has to do with essentially de-appropriating the $8.1 million that we approved in the summer of 23, I guess the spring of 23, for the potential purpose of the building at JBJC. And so we made the motion to de-appropriate that money.
Thank you, Max. So again, too, this has been coming out of the committee, so it's been seconded. So now it's time for any discussion on this. Questions? All right. Seeing no discussions or objections, this motion is passed. Next.
And the third item has to do with $74,000 of money approved for the crisis stabilization capital improvement project, and funding by our ever-present and ever-capable Ms. Ugatil. So that's $74,000. We approved that as well. So that's ready for action.
That's great. Any, again, too, it's an action item coming out of committee, so it's been motion seconded. Any discussion on this? See no objections, that action item is passed, and then we'll go on next.
So I'm going to kick this shortly here over to Ian and Joe, who's online, and this analysis that's been done around Bartlett sustainability is something that was done at the request of the board. We looked in detail at the financial condition that the board or the Bartlett operated under up through 2019 through COVID. And, you know, as we all know, things really changed a lot during COVID. And there are some structural changes that impacted the hospital. Also external environmental issues that impacted the hospital. And a lot of those were developing through COVID but were masked by the fact that we had significant CARES money and CRF money that allowed, provided these additional resources. And so we find ourselves now with a hospital that is, losing $10 million a year. And it's very concerning. And there's been a lot of work that has gone into analyzing why that is. And long and short of it is that there will be some difficult decisions this board and this community are going to have to make around some of the services that are provided. I think it's important that we define in Ms. McKean's comment about what a core service and what isn't a core service. I don't disagree with you in some cases, and the importance of providing some of these services is very high. That core definition is one that's centered around what you typically see in a small sole community provider hospital around the country. It's it's looking at the typical healthcare types of things that they do. And so those were kind of defined as the core, and these other services, while incredibly important to the community, don't fall inside that definition of, what's core or not. And all of these services are ones that we're finding ourselves at a point where the cost of providing those services is significantly greater than the revenue that they generate. And that has changed to a large degree since pre-COVID. And so some of these things we just have to take a look at. It's our responsibility as a board to take a look at these items and say, okay, here's where we are as a community, and what are the options and what should we pursue? So where we're headed with this, and Anita is pulling it up right now, is this interaction with the community and with the assembly that'll kick off tomorrow around, the realities of what we're facing here, and, what kind of recommendation we want to make as a board to the assembly with respect to providing those services. So anyway, you can see the schedule that's laid out there. Tomorrow's a very important meeting with the CBJ Assembly. And then we've got two, I believe, feedback meetings that we're going to be scheduled or have been scheduled, and then a couple of follow-up meetings by both finance and the board of directors. So with that, Ian?
Yeah, I would just add that, whenever you come to an organization with the financial statements, it's a large loss. Your first question is what's driving that? So what we decided to do early on is just focus on diagnostics, what's going wrong. And towards that end, we came up with if Bartlett became an enterprise fund in 1965, what would typically be in a small hospital, community hospital. And that's pretty well defined. Then we said, what are ancillary services? So, and then what are public health services? Those are things that of the city may have owned or we took on because they're more traditional, not parts of a hospital system. And then what Joe did in this great way is he really divided that information up, and we presented that information not only to the board but also to the assembly and the city managers. So with that kind of background, it started thinking us through how do we want to proceed. And after the budget meetings with assembly, we decided to come up with a decision point document. That decision point document is really a document that does the analytics, the history, what things that we could or couldn't do. So, and so what Joe will be presenting is the whole, and then how everything has been kind of looked at specifically. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you, Ian and Mr. Chair. Anita, can I ask you to share the screen that everyone else is seeing so I know what I'm talking to? Is that possible? Thank you very much. Perfect. So this basically takes our budget breakout that we did for the FY25 budget and lumps them into the same categories as we did that presentation. So the first one on the left, I'll just go over the components of this and then we'll dive into all the detail. The first one is the hospital welfare cart, what we consider the enterprise fund of the hospital. Down below, you have the revenues and expenses and the net loss, which ties back to your budgeted documents. We have a options matrix at the bottom that kind of goes over the options we see with each of these programs. And that was refined as we went through the finance committee meeting earlier in the month. And I just want to preface that while we were looking at a lot of these other programs independently, we are continuing to do lots of work for the hospital, such as looking at FTEs, contracts, looking at reimbursement issues. So on a day-to-day basis, as much work's going into the hospital and correcting that issue as any of these other programs that we're also looking at the same time. So if we want to, as we look at RRC, which is the program that we have highlighted up there, we have revenues of $1.77 million against expenses of $2.55 million. And that gives us a net loss of $782,000 projected for FY25. One caveat to this that has been brought up and we've discussed with staff over the last couple of weeks is we didn't budget grant dollars in this program because they hadn't been approved at the state level. And it's always been my operation where I don't put grant dollars in the budget if they're not already approved and allocated to a program. Even with that consideration, when you look at FY24, RRC is projected to lose right at $800,000 this year as well. So when we swing down to the options matrix for RRC, we looked at increased reimbursement. There's not a lot of opportunity on that side because you'd have to either get contracts.
Nita, could you go down one slide? I think he's moved on to the next slide.
No, I'm at the bottom. I'm talking through options.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
So just going through the categories in the options matrix, there we talked about increased reimbursement. There's not a lot there to do because we're not going to get more money from the state at this point. 89% of the patients in RRC are Medicaid. We can't fundamentally change the cost structure over there without changing what we deliver. So staffing is set up where it's either kind of a go, no go. You can see one patient or you can see 16 kind of the same staffing model. So that's after discussing this with the finance committee, we came up with the two options at the bottom, which would be seek permanent subsidization from CBJ or look at closing the program, or CHOW, which stands for change of ownership. Next slide. So this is what Ian was referring to as our decision point document. So what we try to do is get all the information that be required to make a decision on any program and put it all in one single slide. So all the information should be at your fingertips. So looking at history and background, RRC is a program that we inherited from CBJ. We took over the management of RRC in 2000 and fully took over operations in 2003. This was driven by payment changes at the state level that resulted in the CBJ subsidizing that program to the tune of $1 million a year. And so when they gave us that program in 2003, it actually came with additional funds. In the first year of, well, I don't have the first year in front of me. In FY03, we received a little bit over almost $1.1 million in tax from CBJ. And at that point, we were also receiving almost $660,000 in grant funds from the state. And that was a recurring grant fund that we got almost every year the program was in operation. And for the first 20 years, it ranged in somewhere in the $500,000 to $600,000 to $700,000 range, with it now being at $270,000 in the current grant cycle we're sitting in. So we've seen that decrease in half as well.
Hey, Joe, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So what you're saying is that when we got the program in 2000, CBJ subsidized this program at $1 million a year, correct?
Over $1 million a year.
And then also we were getting state grants pretty consistently of $750,000 a year.
Yes. And so when we started digging for the history of this, it must have been something that's been a hot issue kind of over the years. So there was some pretty good analysis that documented the first 5 years of the program. So the first year of the program, even with all that subsidization, is still had a net loss of almost $500,000. And then it continued to lose almost $1 million a year over the next 4 years. So, through 2005, it was losing $1 million a year, even with subsidization from the CBJ and from the state in the form of grants. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure it's going to come up here later on when CBJ stop subsidizing this program.
Yeah, I have all the numbers too. We can kind of chat about those when we get down to the end of it. So when we look at the current conditions of the program, it is continuing to lose. It's a $655,000 loss through the first 8 months of this fiscal year. Like I talked about the payer mix, it is 89% Medicaid, 5% commercial, and 4% private. We have a 40% of the patient population are CBJ residents. We've actually sliced that several different ways over different programs, different life cycles, I guess. And I've seen numbers anywhere from 35% to 48% population being Juneau residents. So it varies over time and kind of how you slice the pie. 50% of the residents served, or 57% of the residents served on RRC, are also search beneficiaries. That's new information that was brought up by staff as well. We are currently operating at a base staff, which can serve the 16 patients as we discussed. There are 4 residential treatment programs in Southeast Alaska. We are a 3.5 resident facility, which is considered a clinically managed resident service. And so we're the only one in Southeast Alaska. There was one in Ketchikan that recently closed as well. There are multiple other 3.5s around the state. There's 7 in the Anchorage area, 2 in Fairbanks. There's one in Wasilla, Eagle River, Soldotna. So there's kind of sprinkled around Alaska, but we are the only one left standing in Southeast Alaska. With that, we are kind of a feeder to the 3.1 clinically managed low-intensity residential services, with the primary one being Gastineau Human Services in Juneau, where we're kind of the primary referral, where people come in for the higher level care that we provide, and they go to a step down at the Gastineau Human Services. Sorry, I'm jumping around a lot from information. So when you go over to the right, we have some stats there.
I'm sorry, John, I don't mean to interrupt you, but under the current conditions, number 6, care in the last 3 years, Rainforest Recovery has cared for 316 unique patients during the last 3 years, with 25 patients receiving care more than, correct?
That is correct. Sorry, I missed that bullet.
So out of the 316 patients, how many of them are from Juneau?
126, I believe, was the number in that report. So it was 42 a year.
2 Juneauites a year? Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was reading that right and understanding that.
Yeah, and that number was it's kind of gone up over the last couple of years. The program was substantially impacted by the COVID pandemic. And so when they reopened in 22, 23, volumes were quite a bit lower. I think year to date, we're sitting at 130 patients. So it might be a little bit higher this fiscal year, just with the program getting spun back up.
Yeah, Max.
Hey, Joe, I got a question for you, because you touched on something there that was new information for me. You said that 50% of the patients are search beneficiaries?
That is correct. That actually came up when we went through this presentation with management last week. That was something that was provided by one of our directors.
Do you know what the reimbursement is and how we're reimbursed by search for their beneficiaries at Rainforest Recovery Center?
So most of their beneficiaries are signed up with the Medicaid program. So we get Medicaid rates predominantly. So when you look at search as a payer, it's only 2%. But search does such a good job. One of the things I think they excel at is getting all the beneficiaries signed up with insurances. So when you look at the payer mix, that's why you don't have to see search as a payer on there. It's predominantly the Medicaid population.
Okay, so they're in the 89% Medicaid bucket there.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to be clear on this too. So 50% of the patients are search beneficiaries, and search is your comment was that Search is really good at making sure that their beneficiaries sign up for Medicaid.
Or sign up for any insurance. I wasn't specific to Medicaid.
Okay. So Search isn't a payer at all for this program or helping?
They were roughly 2%
Thank you, Joe.
as a payer.
I don't understand that. If they're, so 50% are Search beneficiaries, but it's only 2% of the revenue? How does that work?
Well, 2% of the payer mix is Search, not 2% of the revenue. 2% Search as a primary payer.
Thank you.
There's Medicaid and Search.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Is there any more questions around that particular area? So when we look at stats, we have some patient days up there. So in FY23, we saw almost 3,000 patient days. FY24 annualized, you can see there's roughly that 10% increase in patient days, with another 10% increase in the FY25 budget. Outpatient visits make up a smaller proportion of what they see in RRC. Only a couple hundred visits a year for SUD over there. What we have up there also is collections per patient day. So that's what we collect on average on every patient day for RRC residential services. So in FY23, that was $488 roughly. And so the next line down I have listed is max capacity potential. So that's the amount of revenue that we would expect to receive, cash we would expect to receive if we were at 100% occupancy 100% of the time. So that's the absolute best case scenario for revenue based on our payer mix as it is today and what we're collecting today. So when you compare that max capacity potential versus operating costs, you can see even on a best case scenario, this program will struggle to cover its base operating costs.
Joe, this is Ian. Those operating costs are predominantly direct costs. No other allocations.
Yeah, there's no allocation of overhead. So we're not including EVS, facilities, electricity, heating oil, billing, admin. None of that's in this. This is just the staff that are in that building on a day-to-day basis.
I have a question. And so Joe, and we've been with some meetings with the CBJ, and I remember the presentation, but is CBJ aware at this detail about this historical and all of these numbers that you're giving them?
I know that I was in one meeting where we shared it with the city manager and the assistant city manager. I don't know if it's gone beyond that point, Ian.
We have not shared it with the assembly. It's just the city manager and assistant city manager, but this is the purpose of tomorrow's meeting, is to share it.
But it is super important to point out the fact that CBJ operated this program prior to 2000 when they gave it to Bartlett. I don't know if gave is the right word, but they transferred it to Bartlett. And at the time, total subsidy of the program was $1.66 million a year. And we had a loss still of $500,000 after that subsidy. Fast forward 20 years, and the subsidy has dropped from 1.6 million to $270,000. So we've lost $1.4 million roughly of subsidy, and we've got a loss of $800,000. So the reason for that drop in subsidy over time is what, Joe? Why have those subsidies gone away? Do you have any sort of sense of that?
I know on the state grant level, I'm not 100% sure of the application process, but over the last two cycles, it's dropped down to 500,000 from FY20 to 23 and then to 270 in FY24 to 27. So those are state funds that are passed through, is my understanding. So some of that has to do with funding coming from the state level. On the other side, in FY, with the COVID pandemic and the standing down to RRC, I'm assuming, I'm not 100% sure what they did with the funds, but in FY19, we had almost $1.5 million in tax revenue from CBJ, which dropped down to 693 in 20 and 21, and down to 518 in FY22 and FY23, and $0 in FY24. I know we received the $2 million in FY24 just for the hospital operation, so I don't know if that impacted this year. I can only speculate, I guess.
part of the reason why I think it's important to ask the why is that if there was, let's just say the city decided to fund this operation and say, okay, we'll give you your $1 million that you need to have this thing operated at zero, let's say. What happens in 5 years or 10 years when, I mean, how do you lock that funding in? It's important for us to know that we've got a ironclad way to know that this program will have funding going forward if it's going to be continued. And the past suggests that it hasn't been very ironclad. That's why I'm, I guess, asking that question is, you know, what do we do to fix that revenue number so that it will always be there to support ROC if it's going to be supported?
Joe,
you have thoughts on that front, Joe?
I mean, we could, as you frame the question to CBJ, particularly tomorrow night and in the future, I mean, you could do it with a mill rate that's dedicated to the hospital where we get our, that's how the hospital, and here, the last one I practiced at or worked at, we had a specific mill rate. And so we got, 35 cents on every $1,000 of assessed value throughout the county. And that was our guaranteed amount every year. Or you could tie it back to, a 1% sales tax or something like that, where we get that dedicated sales tax number as well. But you'd have to have it locked into statute somehow where we get that moving forward. The grant side, trying to get that locked in from the state, I don't think that's possible. We typically don't try to rely on grant funds to support a program just because they're never guaranteed year to year.
thank you. Next, Joe, go ahead.
So just going down to the analysis section, we can see that wages and benefits exceeded net revenue by 1.4 million in 2023, 900,000 in 24, and projected to go down to 522 in FY25. Direct payroll costs far exceeding net revenue is difficult to fix. Like Ian brought up before, this isn't even taking into consideration all the other costs that take to run this program. So when we're going through this analysis, we looked at FY23 cost report that kind of allocates all the costs for admin in general across all the other departments. And there was $3 million allocated in costs to RRC. So those are sometimes costs that could be allocated somewhere else, maybe the cost-based department where we'd actually get reimbursement on that. But there was $3 million also that isn't part of this analysis. I've touched base number 3 a couple times, staffing levels being at minimum. Like I stated before, program would need to operate 100% capacity with no increases in cost to cover staffing costs in FY24. We do have program closure would have minimal impact on emergency department utilization per ED position leader. That was one conversation we had. There are other potential ones that are brought forward by staff, including, impacted GHS and how they receive patients from us, and the level of patients they're able to receive from us. There would be no 3.5 level center in Southeast Alaska as well. So there might be some discharge problems as people detox and med surge. Some of that was empirical data with no data. So I don't have numbers to support what the total impact would be on those. With all that down.
Joe, real quick, I just want to ask you, just number 5, because I think this is everybody would be curious about this. The program closure would have minimal impact on the emergency department. So, I think that a lot of people are going to say it's going to have a lot of impact down there. Can you tell us where this data came from or what your thoughts are on this?
Ian was the one that passed that on. Ian, do you want to share the provider that?
Yeah, happy to do that. I talked with the head of the ER physician group there and asked him, what did he think? How disruptive would it be if we closed this program on the ED? Because that was one of the areas that, Dr. Jones has been worried about. And he said this program, it would have an effect, but not significant from his standpoint. So it's an N of 1, but it's someone who's been in the ED business here for a long time.
Thank you. Lisa.
So ED patients go to sleep off anymore at Rainforest? I mean, that's what it was like when I was working.
I'm sorry, Lisa, I didn't hear the question. Can you say it one more time?
Well, in the past, I mean, it's been a while since I was a house supervisor, but patients would come into the ED for sleep off and then they go to Rainforest to do it. So what's gonna happen to those patients now if we don't have Rainforest anymore? What's gonna happen to them?
So, Kenny?
Yeah.
So a couple thoughts, first, as far as sleep off goes, sleep off is now run by CBJ and the fire department. And so that will continue. I believe that there is, some individuals that cycle in and out of the ER multiple times. And we do have some of those people go to RRC and enter recovery either for short or long periods of time. Without that opportunity, that's definitely going to affect us. I think the numbers are really hard to tell, but I mean, it's definitely going to affect us, and also, also just, the health and well-being of the community, and, and what's happening, with all the other services, the fire and stuff. So there's going to be some definite indirect effects that I think are going to be substantial for our community, and also, I guess, for our ER, I would say that, we really don't know, because that program's been with us for so many years.
Dr. Jones, do you see a lot of patients coming from out of Juneau and then coming to the ER to detox and then going to Rainforest Recovery? Or do they just come?
Usually what I think most of the people that come, well, we do see some of them, but most of the people that come from out of town either come, I believe, from the correctional facilities in around town, or from other places, and they've already went through their ASAM certification, and then they are directly admitted. So most of those we don't see coming into our ER on their way to RRC. They're usually directly admitted, I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Lisa, did you get your question answered by the sleep office at CCFR now?
I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure. I think the impact's gonna be greater than minimal. That's just my opinion, based on what I just heard.
Okay. Max.
So one of the things that was on the table last week at finance was this possibility of determining whether there's a third party that could take that program over in full for Bartlett. Have we put any energy into that yet, or time, Ian, into evaluating that?
Not for rainforestry, I think that was.
Okay. I mean, it is part of what's on the written recommendation here, and that's part of the reason I'm bringing it up.
Oh, I know what you're referring to. Yeah, there's the other program that is the 3.1 program. And I believe I have some time to discuss that with that gentleman. I was thinking about a different program.
So Kenny, and it's kind of hard to read, I know in here, it's in the board packet, but it's important to focus on that blue box at the bottom, at the tentative recommendation that came out of finance is to determine whether a third party can be identified to take the program over in full from Bartlett if this is not realistic closure of the program. The program could be retained if the CBJ chose to provide a permanent subsidy. It's a difficult financial recommendation. Is in no way a reflection on the individuals who provide and receive these services. So that's kind of what's on the table for this. I don't know how you want to proceed with those, Kenny, but that's what we came up with out of finance for this.
Thank you, Max. I think this is great, and I just want to make sure that with that blue box there, also too, I was at the finance committee meeting, and I just want to make sure that the finance committee really gave some definite direction that they want to hear what the public has to say before we make any kind of recommendations, and before we put this forward. So I think it's really important that we keep saying that over and over again. that there's going to be several opportunities for the public to speak out. I see people in the public shaking their heads, wanting to say stuff to us, you know, please, we encourage you to email us and let us know your thoughts too. So thank you very much. Joe, I'll turn this back over to you.
All right. Moving on to the next slide. So this is going back to look at the ABA program. Was there a question?
No questions.
Sorry, I just had some feedback on my computer, I guess. ABA program had revenues of $461,000, expenses of $1.1 million, and a net loss of $656,000. When you look at the options matrix, you see a closed change of ownership as the only option. And if you go down to the next slide, we'll kind of go over that. We had already started working on the decision point document when we had the two lead providers in the ABA program give notice of resignation effective June 13th, 2024. So with that happening, that basically resulted in the closure of the program by them stepping away and opening their own ABA program. And so with discussing that with the finance committee, they came up with the board recommendation of help to support them on that mission of opening a more sustainable ABA program in the Juneau area. So I wasn't going to go into a lot of depth on that one unless someone had specific questions.
Any specific questions concerning this ABA program?
And could you just scroll down just a little bit there, Anita, just so you can see what the recommendation coming out of management finance committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just for the benefit of the public who are listening in and don't know what ABA is, could you briefly summarize what this program is?
Absolutely. Joe, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can go over that. Sorry, I should have dove into that more, not thinking that way. So ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. So it's a program that works with children up to age 18 that have autistic, are on the spectrum, ages 2 to 21. So we've had it with BRH since 2021, with referrals being accepted in June of that year. So they work with the kids. They had a smaller population run through there. I think at one point they were seeing a handful at a time. And it's one of those programs that was started as a private practice, contracted to the school district when they could no longer sustain it. My understanding is that that's when it kind of came over to us.
Thank you, Joe. You know, Max, I think that is such a great point in the last slide when you read the blue bar down there. So I'm going to read it to the board recommendations that came out of finance to support departing staff and helping start up this ABA program through the private practice. So, you know, we believe that this program is still going to be in our community and available for our community to get that. And Bartlett's going to help support this program too, helping these new clinicians get started in one of just.
Yeah, I would just add that Joe talked, when we met with the city manager and assistant manager, Joe talked to them about giving them space. You know, we talked to them about selling them the assets that they need, you know, the lowest price that we can do from a legal standpoint, and support them in anything they can do to maintain this program.
Thank you.
Mr. Solomon Gross, can I ask a question? Just out of curiosity, just for clarification, board recommendation here on this blue box, and then, so just to clarify, are those the current board recommendations, or are those recommendations of the finance committee to the board?
So these are the recommendations that came out of finance.
So they're not board positions yet.
Right. Nothing has been at all like this. Again, just to clarify, the board and finance really made a point saying that before we make any decisions, we want to be thoughtful with staff's input and thoughtful with the public's input, and as long as in our assembly too, to make sure that we are being very clear on what we're doing.
I think I was just confused because it looks, when you read it, it looks like that's the current board recommendation
Whereas what I hear you saying is it's really the finance committee's recommendation to the board at this point.
And I would, Dr. Malter, I would say it's more of a scoping. I mean, I think what we're doing, especially when you don't need to roll up, Anita, but on those options, what we're doing is identifying the options. And so when, for example, RRC, we find somebody else to operate it, we close it, or we get some subsidy for it, right? So I guess we're at a position, the one thing that, what it leaves out is status quo.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the scope, but at this point, we've got a long road to go in terms of collecting input from the public on how we want to proceed on this.
Thank you, Max. And I will try to speak up louder. We'll turn this back over to Joe.
If you want to go down to the next slide, Anita. So the next program we're going to go over is the Crisis Center. So you're going to see two of these slides specifically for the Crisis Center. The first one is the budgeted numbers for revenue and expenses. So revenue was budgeted based on pro forma, which I'll go into more detail later. So with the budgeted revenue of $2 million, expenses of $3.2 million, that resulted in a net loss of $1.2 million. And if you want to just click down to the next slide real quick there, Anita. So after we had a couple of months experience under our belt with what the program would look outside the pro forma, what it looks like actually, we had to come up with different revenue projections. So we call that an estimate. You can see there on that blue line. So based on the first 3.5 months of experience, we project revenue to be $960,000 in FY25, expenses to be $3.1 million with a net loss of $2.2 million. That was predominantly driven by volume differences between the pro forma and what we've actually seen and experienced, which we'll go over on the next slide. So in the options matrix, we have the same two that were kind of stated before, which is subsidized, change of ownership, or closure. So the crisis services is adolescent, it started off as adolescent and adult crisis services were needed in Juneau. And so the pro forma that was built around those 4 programs, a residential, a crisis program for both adults and children. And so we opened up with crisis observation services, crisis residential services for children and adolescents, which opened in December of 2023. Layout of the facility was a primary driver of only being the child set up and not doing the adults at that time. With our current conditions, we've had 24 encounters of adolescents since opening in December of 23. We're expected a loss of $1.1 million in this fiscal year. So that's based on roughly 6 months of operations. It's built on a fee-for-service demonstration model through the state. So it's what they call a waiver program through Medicaid program. So they have a waiver to allow for these services to be paid for Medicaid. So when we did the pro forma, when you look at the numbers in the pro forma analysis, we tried to break the pro forma down to the pieces that were only applicable to us. So it was the child side. So we had to do some monkeying around with their Excel spreadsheet to line up so we had a good apples to apples comparison for what our estimate and budget would be compared to the pro forma. And so you can see in the FY24 pro forma, that's based on a full fiscal year. You can see the revenues right out $2 million, which is real close to where we budgeted. Expenses were at $2.8 million. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing. And so that it was projected to have a net loss of $577,000 on the pro forma. So when we look at the FY24 estimate, you can see that revenues are far below what the pro forma stated at $436,000 on expenses of $1.48 million with a projected loss of just over $1 million there. And then when we pop over to the FY25 estimates and budgets, so I'm not going to go back over the pro forma. You can see those numbers I stated in the prior 2 graphs. Revenues $960,000, just under $2 million, with expenses wavering between $3.124 million and $3.189 million, and losses somewhere between $2.2 million and $1.2 million in total. When we get down to the analysis, wages and benefits are estimated to exceed net revenue by $2 million in FY25.
Joe, before you go on to the analysis, Can we focus on, because I think it's an important thing to really center on, and that is difference between the pro forma and the estimate for 24, the pro forma and the estimate for 25. Just help us understand better when we look at Medicaid revenue, why is Medicaid revenue so much below the pro forma? What were the assumptions that they used in the pro forma that just aren't bearing fruit?
So the biggest driver between total revenue was probably the main part of your question, was just the occupancy rate. So the pro forma had an occupancy rate of roughly 75%, which would be 3 patients every day on the residential side. In reality, we're seeing closer to half a patient every single day on the residential side. And so we're about 1/6 of what we had in revenue on the pro forma and, in experience there. And one thing I didn't understand the pro forma, they never really had any commercial insurance over there. So our payer mix is substantially better than the pro forma. But even with those contracted rates, if we go full occupancy, this program would struggle to make money, even if we were almost 100% commercial when we did the analysis. So even between the two different rate structures of Medicaid and commercial, we just don't have enough patients going through the program. And we're well below projections based on the pro forma.
So on the pro forma assumptions, though, what were the assumptions that they used that were just?
I get where you're going. So their assumptions were built on a national average. So they took, so it's incidences per X amount of population is how they kind of build it. And then they take Juneau's population, times it by that number to get up an estimated amount of volume per year. And then they actually increased ours by 140% because of our geographic location is what they explained it as. So even if we go back to the base of their estimate, we're not even getting close to the national average in crisis visits, for our population size.
Hey, Joe, can you just tell me like the number? I know percentages. Can you tell me the number of people?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Approximately, Ian, would you know by any chance?
No, I think maybe Nate would know. He's involved in those, or
I'd have it on a spreadsheet in my computer. I can dig it up, and it take me a few minutes.
So, but to the point, though, so there's a national average. They took the national average, they multiplied it by 140%. That's what they assumed the patient flow would be. And in fact, what we're seeing is not even the national average. So just the demand for the program is significantly less than what their pro forma assumptions were. Is that fair?
Based on our first couple months of experience, yes.
Dr. Astor.
But my sense in the community is that this is such an important program. Is it, sometimes when you get a program rolling, there is time to get things rolling, essentially. Is it possible that the numbers could look better in the next few years?
Sure.
There's always that potential, but this is something I've kind of talked over with Ian, like based on our financial situation at this point, our flexibility of waiting a program out to see if it's going to be self-sustaining. We don't have the benefit of making any bad mistakes, I guess. So every program that we try to retain for multiple years is going to be tough. It could be, but I just can't give you a yes, no on that.
now on our current trajectory, we have 3 years worth of cash before we get to a zero fund balance. Which means once we get to zero, either the state kicks or the city kicks in, or we don't pay payroll. Those are the realities. So the question is how long do you want these to be in existence before we make that decision?
We do have
that's the quandary that we're facing.
If I could just add, your point's a good one, Dr. Astor, and that is, what if we wait? One of the things that could be evaluated is, does the CBJ want to provide a permanent subsidy for this one? To allow that to, see if how it develops. Lisa.
Maybe this is
I'm missing the point, missing this, but how are we marketing this program? Because it sounds like only juvenile adolescents are utilizing it. And is there a need for crisis intervention for adolescents in surrounding communities? I mean, and are they utilizing it?
Ian, Joe, Kim, anybody want to take this?
I get and try, and I can call him Jen. Through the chair, the concern that we have with that is opening it up to outside of Juneau. We could do that, but it'd be the problem of placement. So since it's a 7-day residential, you know, we're hesitant to bring, you know, kiddos in that may stay 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks that don't have a placement. And I know that there has been some interest from outlying facilities, but that seems to be the, you know, seems to be that they need longer than 7 days.
Most want 2 or 3 weeks at minimum for placement, and then it's could be that there's no safe placement after they come see us. But we've had multiple requests from all over the state to use our facility. So if we were to open up and had stable staffing, I think we could fill it, but we have to look at perhaps a different model, not the crisis model.
Because if I'm not mistaken, actually, Lisa, go ahead with your follow-up question.
Well, my next question is, I mean, I realize that you have to have a certificate of need, but is there a need for long-term or longer-term adolescent treatment that then we could change it to so that we could make money? Because to me, just thinking about it, if all we can do is up to 7 days, I can see why we're not making any money and why we never will. Because that's just short-term. That's just coming home and coming in and dealing with some personal problems and at home and then going back home again. And rather than, my own career, we got lots of kids with some serious emotional and behavioral issues. And I don't think 3 or 4 days is enough.
To the chair, I think it's also important to remember this is a voluntary program. It's not designed to be a locked down unit. It's designed to be voluntary with a delayed egress. So if we looked at taking a higher acuity type of adolescent through that, we'd have to do some significant changes probably to ensure that the building would be locked down and change the regulations that would change how we would staff as well.
I guess that the thing I was going to say, Lisa, was what this program is designed for is for adolescents. Actually, it was designed for adolescents or adults because they were going to have partitions between the two of them that were in crisis. So if you have someone that's out of town that's in severe crisis, how are we going to get them there? You know, how are we going to transport them to?
Oh, I understand. I can just see why we're having issues. But the way the model is set up right now, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, Joe, go ahead.
Oh, just going down the analysis, wages and benefits estimated to exceed net revenue by $2 million in FY 25. That's based on our first full quarter of data. Staffing levels are currently at minimal staffing, and one of the drivers of our cost this year is contract labor and being able to staff that. Volumes and revenue both remain low and significantly below the pro forma. And then, do you want me to kick it back to you, Max, to read the finance recommendation?
Yeah, so so program closure and spatialization plan development for Aurora building. So I might need Kim to kind of dial in on that, but I want to go on first. This program could be retained if the CBJ Assembly chose to provide a permanent subsidy. Difficult financial recommendation is no way a reflection of individuals who provide and receive these services. So spatialization plan development for Aurora building is a bunch of fancy words that I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ian or Kim, but basically what can we do with the building that we're not doing now that would be an effective use for that to provide services that are needed that we don't have space for now. So
right,
yeah.
and you know, the building has been financed with debt. Those debts are revenue bonds that have prohibitions about using the space for anything other than what one would consider 501c3 type purposes. So we've asked Nate to take a look at that. about what programs we could put in there if we indeed shut down the crisis center, but we couldn't rent that space to independent physicians.
So for example, I don't know, infusion or oncology services. I mean, there'd be a variety of potential, you know, healthcare related
Right.
services that we could put in the hospital services.
Right.
Potentially.
And, you know, one of the things that we don't show, not only over allocated costs, indirect costs, but we also have debt service on them. So interest is not included. I don't think you included interest in that, Joe, right?
Nope.
And no principal payments, which are escalating over the next couple of years.
Which we're gonna have no matter what.
Right.
Thank you. All right, do you want to go to the next slide?
So back to me. All right. Moving on to the next program is the BOPS program. So this is another program that's actually considered core. It's vital to the operation of the mental health unit in the hospital. So based on our budget, we had revenues of $1.06 million on expenses of $3.86 million, with a net margin, a net loss of $2.8 million. With it being required service that's, you know, there to help service the mental health unit, the option that we got back to after finance committee was just a reduced cost realign, with the realign really being the option that we're looking at for this particular program. Move down to the next slide, please. So when Bartlett Outpatient Psychiatric Service was first stood up, it was for the utilization of the psychiatrists that were needed to staff the mental health unit. So it was their overflow hours in essence. So you need roughly 4 to 5 full-time docs to staff the program effectively, with the primary driver behind that number as being the amount of call they have to take without, you know, sustaining burnout on them. And so what we do with those extra hours when they're not on the mental health unit is you utilize them in the outpatient services clinic to provide, you know, the care that is needed in the community. Is there a question or a comment there?
No, it's just a cough.
Okay, sorry. And so we have this labeled as pro forma analysis when we jump over to the right, but it's really just an analysis of services done over the last 7 years. So we have data there for 2018 through the 2025 budget with FTEs, visits, charges, and expenses. From FY18 to present, we've seen FTEs grow from 4.12 in 18 to a max of 15.93 in 22, down to a budget of 13.7 for next year. And we have not seen substantial growth in visits, having 4,817 in 18 and a budgeted number of 3,811. One of the drivers behind that, we're trying to analyze that number. All we have from 18 is data that's in the system. What we couldn't pin down is how they counted the visits. So there could be discrepancy in the data behind that one. So it's just to be fully transparent with what the data is. Charges are standard, so we know those are 100% accurate. So we had charges of roughly $2 million in FY18. And I have the number up there for charges. I don't have what the actual net collections or reimbursement would be on that, because when we did contractuals, those aren't applied on a department by department level. They're just applied to the hospital. So you can expect roughly 50% collection on charges based on, you know, the hospital-wide contractual rate. And so then we go down to expenses. In FY18, we had almost $2 million in expenses. And that's risen up to almost $5 million in 2024 and dropped back to 3.86 in 2025. With that, biggest driver of that drop is us budgeting fully staffed and not a whole bunch of contract labor like we have today. And so we look at the current conditions. It's projected to lose $2.8 million in FY25. It has a payer mix that is 33% Medicaid, 52% commercial, and 15% other. Commercial payers, this is just informational, pay on a fee schedule. So you get a payment per fee schedule for every CPT code that the providers bill out. Current staffing includes 6 providers and 5 clinicians, with 2 of them being remote. In FY23, we saw 1,160 patients receive service. That number is at 958 in FY '24. We have 3 adults and 3 children, adolescents on the wait list. So when we look at the analysis, we did have decreased expenses in FY '25, and that's back to the stated reason of a decrease in contract labor. Expenses have far exceeded the gross charges on an annual basis for this program. And just to note there, we have 5 providers will be required for the minimum staffing for MHU and BOPS.
Joe and Anita, if you just scroll back up just a little bit. So just for additional context, I don't know if this is Kim or you, but to help kind of understand what happened up there from a cost structure and what that implies for riding the ship up there, the increase in the FTEs between 2019 and 2020, that significant jump that resulted in the, follow-on big increase in expenses. It's all COVID related, but specifically what was going on up there, Kim, that caused that increase?
That is a great question. To the chair. I think part of it was utilizing some of the staff for some of our COVID services, I think is part of it. I would have to do a deeper dive to see specifically where those staff went. I think it was to open up more services, at clinicians. I think clinicians are included in that FTE count. Joe? Physicians are included in that. And to answer a second part of Max's question, when I looked at the utilization of CARES Fund, a chunk of that did go to this program. So I know that they were allocated to this.
Dr. Moulton.
Along the same lines, even looking at your 2025 budget, it's three times as many FTEs as in 2018. There's no COVID, subsidization, yet the number of visits is down 20%. So is it clear to anybody why we have 3.5 times as many people when business is down 20%?
So we did if I could just, we did a deep dive in this on finance a little over a year ago. And what we were told at the time, Dr. Malter, was that because they could no longer see patients in the unit anymore, they had to go to an outpatient model. The outpatient model required more FTEs. And it was okay to hire all those FTEs because there was CRF money that masked the total cost. So you had this growth in the FTEs that was driven by COVID, CARES money, if you will, underneath that held the whole thing up. And then at the end of 22, that's where you see that big change in the charges between 22 and 23. That's the COVID money going away. With that, you have this big carry loss, if you will, that has been there ever since. And the ship that what we talked about then was staffing that model, staffing it such that we were providing services to the inpatients, because remember our inpatient inpatient average daily census went down to like 2. I mean, we were very low up there. And so we've been working to, Kim, correct me because I'll probably get this wrong, but we've been correcting the staffing so that we can provide more inpatient services and reduce the amount of outpatient services that were being provided. Does that sound about right?
I think we're trying to balance both of those. I think also in FY18, I think the bump we're saying is during that time, we were starting a program in the emergency department where BHTs would be staffed in the ER to help with the one-to-ones and help at a higher level from holding, when we're holding psychiatric patients in the ER. And then of course, once COVID hit, we added more. So each BHT we needed, several, at least 6, right, to cover the 3 shifts for night and days, and then like a part-time. And then when COVID hit, I think we added more onto that because we of course closed down that program, but then we opened up the COVID screening area and used a lot of those BHTs. And I think they fell under the BOPS budget.
So I just can't help to going back to the very beginning where we all talked about this BOPS program is not going away because it is a core service to help support the mental health unit. So now we're just trying to figure out how to right the ship.
Yeah, and if you go down, that's.
Hold on one second, Lisa, real quick, and then I'll go to you next.
Yeah.
Are we looking at reducing the FTEs? I mean, that seems.
Max, I'm gonna go ahead and let you say what you're gonna say.
Well, she asked the question.
Isn't that part of the, I thought that'd be part of your answer. Oh,
Okay. Well, I was gonna let Ian do this, but that's fine. So obviously it's a core service and the mental health service in that unit is core. And we're gonna continue to operate it that way. And then the changes that are being made up there within management's purview don't really require approval. How you do it is.
Lisa, is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm saying on the right-hand side there, it says 5 FTEs are required, but we've got people in these very different categories. We've got psychiatrists and we've got these technicians and we've got clinicians. What are those 5 FTEs?
The 5 providers, when we looked at it, those are the psychiatrists that are required, psychiatrists and nurse practitioners that are required to staff the mental health unit.
And so that does not include the clinicians.
That does not include the clinicians. That does not include the day-to-day staff.
Thank you.
You, Jim, this one now. Okay, Joe.
Moving on to the next slide. So on this one, we kind of got home health and hospice categorized together at the side. That's mostly due to the way we have to staff those 2 programs with the nurses cross-covering between the 2. So I'll go through home health first. We have revenues of $424,000 in the budget, expenses of $1.36 million, and a net loss of $934,000. On the hospice side, we had $504,000 in revenue budgeted, on $951,000 in expenses, with a net loss of $448,000. When we looked down at the options for these, when we talked through it in the finance committee, we had the option to subsidize with CBJ. That one kind of carried over. We had the option to close the program, or change of ownership was the preferred option on both programs. Next slide. Oh, this is gonna be a struggle for me. I have to apologize. I have a cold. My eyes are all watery.
Hang in there, Joe.
Yeah. So Bartlett Home Health has programs. So the program is home health care, which provides nursing care, wound care, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy to homebound patients in the Juneau area. This was a program that we took on over the last year. We are still working on certifications and getting billing up for this program. And so when we look at the current conditions, we've expended approximately $470,000 in the first 9 months of the operation. And it is budgeted to lose approximately $930,000 for FY25. Some of the problems we've had over the first 9 months of the program was lack of consistent availability of physical therapists due to the intake for those patients. We did have a resignation of a director where we're able to do some shifting in FTEs to help save costs between the 2 programs. We are not billing, like I stated before, for either of these programs. Let me see. Both space, home health and hospice share a lease space costing $2,600 a month. All the patients served are in the CBJ service area. And the payer mix is 10% Medicaid, 79% Medicare, 9% private, and 1% VA. BRH has held initial discussions with a private home health and hospice entity with interest in operating these programs. So this was the entity that was also interested in starting up a program in the Juneau area, both programs, when it was decided that we'd start the program. There was a pro forma completed that was done by internal staff. We've been reviewing that over time with both Ian and me looking at it, as well as Nate. Some of the things we've been able to hit census on home health, but not on the hospice side. The revenue projections were a little bit rosier than we're actually seeing. So our charges per episode up there were less. When you look at FY 24 expenses and FY 24 revenues in the pro forma section, our expenses are lower than the pro forma, but so are our revenues by quite a bit. Some of that has to do with staffing. As we'd be able to share a director between the two, we'd be able to save some of those costs. Through March of 2024, wage and benefit expenses have exceeded gross revenue by $55,000 in this program. So this is another program where we do not have allocated costs to it. So we'll see some of our costs that from billing, accounting, overhead costs that we get put over to this on the cost report, which would impact our cost-based reimbursement for our inpatient units. We do have it down there that volumes have been constrained due to the challenge of meeting the physical therapy needs and other staffing needs. And I think that's all I have on this program, Max, if you want to take the next step there.
Max?
Yeah, they're so closely tied together, Joe. I guess I'd like you to walk through hospice.
All right, let me go through that one. I should have jumped there.
Yeah.
So hospice is a program that, as was stated earlier, helps people with the passing from this life to as their end of life care is taken over. Predominantly, it's usually the last 3 to 6 months of a patient's life that they're in the hospice program. One of the big drivers between our program that we see locally compared to nationally is we have a much shorter length of stay. And that's down in the pro forma section there, where the national average is 92 days in the hospice program, where our program is seeing 27.8 days is our average length of stay. One of the drivers between these two programs as we reviewed them was they came over from CCS, which had a lower wage and benefit cost than Bartlett. And so when we brought them into our pay structure, our benefit structure, our costs naturally went up higher with that. PERS is an add-on to our cost that CCS didn't have, which is 22% of wages. So we saw a large increase in benefits related to these employees when we took on these programs. And so looking at current conditions, we haven't set up our billing services on this one as well. I got the same statement on the director being shared between the two programs. The staffing is also shared between the two. So the nurses help cover the call at nights. And so that helps reduce the burden on nurses and burnout. So that's where these programs work really well together. I think Dr. Rado brought that up as well. They do share that lease space at $2,600 a month. All patients are in the CBJ area. You get the payer mix at 13% Medicaid, 79% Medicare, a little less private than home health. We are also in talks with that third party about their desire to enter this market in relation to these two programs. We did have pro forma completed internally by staff as well. We've seen a lot less admissions to the program than was stated in the pro forma, with our length of stay being a lot less as well. Our expenses have been lower than the pro forma, but so our revenue is far below what the pro forma was as well. And so this program is continuing to lose money for Bartlett as well. This one has the same thing as home health. All our costs would be allocated to this program, and it not being cost-based and reimbursed, that would reduce our reimbursement for our inpatient unit as well. So through March 2024, wage and benefits expenses have exceeded gross revenue by $140,000. Staffing levels currently at minimum levels, and that's due to trying to just get nurses for the program, trying to reduce contract labor. Both programs require 24-hour on-call availability, so we have to have a certain numbers of nurses just to sustain that. There has been, I know, some moves on securing donations to help that program be more sustainable as well. I know Maria has done some work on that.
Thank you, Joe. Max, I'm going to have you talk about the blue boxes, and I'm just reading them again over from what we talked about at finance. I think it's very important that, as Max reads this, that they know that how important this program is to this community and how much the board really knows how important this is. So Max, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think the context in that first sentence is there deliberately. And I would just say that Kim Stout and all the staff, and certainly Kim is very ably worked very hard on standing up hospice and home care for Bartlett. And I know Dr. Urata was on the Hospice and Home Care Board of Juneau back when it was an independent entity before it went to Catholic Community Service. And there was a lot of history that led it to ultimately coming to Bartlett. And I think we all share the desire to make sure that this is a vibrant, strong Juneau. We've got to have that as our land. It's just a matter of how we get there. And so, one of the issues is a third-party provider. And if that's not successful, and that will be, looked at, evaluated, I guess, for not only its viability, but also its ability to stand there long-term and be able to provide those services. And in the absence of that, I personally, my opinion about it is that it would be better off continue to be housed in Bartlett to make sure that we can take care of that program. And so I wanted to state that before I say the board understands the importance of this program. The community will work to ensure that services are retained in the community. Management will pursue transfer of operations to a third party. If this is not successful, the board and management will pursue subsidies.
Thank you. Board member, any questions, comments? Again, I'm sorry,
Mr. President, if I could just have 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
If you could go back to go back 2 more. 1 more. There we go. What I wanted to point out to the board is that if you look at the margin at the hospital, that's a loss of 2.8. When we talked in the CEO letter about having a sustaining, that would be about 3% of your net revenue, 138. That's about 4.1. Let's just say $4 million. So our task is to get it from 2.8 loss to 4.0 million dollar gain. That's about a 6.8, almost $7 million. Every program after that, let's say if we have a loss of, let's say 100,000, you add 100,000 on that $7 billion. That's kind of the dilemma that we're working on. So what do you use margin for? You use it for IT equipment, medical equipment, buildings, programmatic growth, debt service. So you have to have that margin, not just to put it into the bank, but you use it for things that are not expensed, like principal payments, the MRIs that we bought, the buildings that need to be replaced at some point in time. So that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that without subsidization, what we're doing is essentially asking the hospital to generate more. And that means then the question is, can it really get to the 7, much less add another 2 million or 5 million, depending upon the decision. So that's kind of bracketing the problem that we have from a financial standpoint.
To that point, can we talk a little bit about critical access and some of the things that we've been looking at to try to do that? Do just that?
Right. There are a number of activities that are moving forward on the hospital side that we still have to do. Number one, we, as you know, in the CEO letter, we instituted a physician control committee that is chaired and run by Kim, Joe, and Chad. Look at FTEs. So we are slowly reducing the number of FTEs. We know we have excess FTEs because they've grown significantly since the pre-COVID time, but our volumes have not grown. right? So that's one thing that we're doing. We're looking at all of our contracts. We have duplicate contracts that we need to do. So for example, we had one IT contract that we decided to do simply because we can do it in the Microsoft 365. So going through that, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're also looking at a change of our status. That status is a designation that gets you different reimbursement. Joe has been working with Hall Render to look at critical access designation. And designation then allows you to get cost-based reimbursement for both inpatient and outpatient Medicare services. Right now, we are cost-based only for Medicare inpatient services. So that could add, I don't know if, Joe, you want me to give out the number, but that's, about $3 to $4 million it's done right. Having said that, the way we've organized ourselves with all these different entities, we've actually made our reimbursement, cost-based reimbursement worse by adding all these entities that are sinkholes for cost. And so we also have to have a look at kind of how do we set these things up legally so that one doesn't hurt the reimbursement of the hospital any sooner. So there's a number of things that is going on. We're having some progress on that, I think. So we'll be ready to show that progress here in the next 1 or 2 meetings as we go into the new fiscal year.
Thank you, Ian. I know we have a lot more questions on that. I don't already want to do that. What I want to quickly just go over real quick is the timeline, and then we're going to take a break. So again, this was brought to the Finance Committee on May 10th with the decision point presentation and management's recommendation. Spending quite a lot of time on the board meeting tonight, making sure that our board of directors really understand this too and have an opportunity to ask questions. And then tomorrow we're going to go in front of the assembly, and when we go in front of the assembly tomorrow, management will do a very quick summation of what we just spent almost an hour and 40 minutes on here tonight. And then the assembly is going to be wanting to speak to board members and having the board members talk about what our thoughts are, and giving the assembly feedback from the board. So tomorrow night, that's what's going to happen. So I really wanted to make sure that the board got as educated as much as possible on what we talked about in the Finance Committee. And then from the period from tomorrow on to June 19th, it's going to go to the community for feedback and engagement period. And I know there's going to be a couple of opportunities for the board to meet with the public in person, but also please know that if you're not a public speaker, send us an email. Every single email will be read by the entire board, so we can hear the comments from the public. And then the Finance Committee will convene again on June 24th, which is the day before the board meeting of the 25th. I know it's really close, but we decided that we really wanted to give as much time as possible for the public, for the assembly, for everybody to just give us our feedback. We will then, as a board, hopefully be able to make some recommendations that will come out of that from the board of directors, which will be at our June 25th meeting. And then we'll review the final recommendations, and of course, we'll send this on to the assembly as we promised before too. The assembly has entrusted with this board the assembly is entrusted in this board to make very tough decisions. We've talked about it the last few months that the decisions that we're going to have to make as a board are going to be extremely tough, and we're going to have to make them, and we're going to have to be very clear on them and then put those recommendations to the assembly. With that, I'm going to take a break right now. So it's 7:45, and I know we went a really long period of time. So let's take a quick 10-minute break. Reconvene at 5 minutes to 8, and start.
Ugly.
That's why Bob says, listen, come here, it's less than if you do in the private sector.
Pretty good. I think we're back. Everybody back? So, the last section that we went through with the city documents, that was an action item, and I should have done that before we took a break, but there's an action item to move forward with our timeline and our plan. The action item did come out of finance. It was seconded. Is there any conversation about this? Any questions about this? Any objections? Seeing no objections, the action item passes. That we're gonna go back to.
Mr. Chair, I apologize, as I informed you earlier, I've got friends that are leaving on the boat tonight, and I'm gonna have to leave the meeting for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Max, for coming in tonight. And we'll see you tomorrow. Yep. With that, Dr. Walter, Chief of Staff, we're going over to you for the next staff report.
Thanks, Mr. President. The Met staff met on May 14th. It was business as usual. There's a report into your executive session section, and I can answer more questions there if there are questions on my report. I think the most two points. One is the medical staff was certainly interested in this exact same question that the board is discussing tonight, and med staff appreciated Mr. Warden's and his senior leadership team giving very detailed and transparent information. The second point I would like to make is that the medical staff acknowledged 3 nurses this year as nurses of excellence, and we were very happy to do it. As I said to folks when we were giving out the presentation of the awards, that it was probably the best part of the chief of staff's year. We acknowledged Marlene Dunker, who works in Beaumont. We acknowledged Adrian Pierce, who works at Wildflower Court. And we acknowledged Ms. Joyce Chambers, who has done informatics and helped medical staff and nursing staff for 15 years there. And all 3 of them appreciated it. And it was nice for the medical staff to be able to honor those folks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Malter. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Malter? And of course, anything about med staff, you can ask in executive session. Thank you very much. With that, we will go to number 10, our planning committee minutes with
As usual, the minutes accurately reflect what took place in the planning committee. We spent a fair amount of time, there is an action item, we spent a fair amount of time talking about the continuation of the ED program and where it's going from here. We had charged the staff and the members and the consultants with getting the plans to 35%. They're very close to that, but before we move any further than that, we would it would be in our best interest to bring on that construction management contractor. So our action item is we're close to having the funds. You would. Thank you. We're close to having the funds in place. As you can see that there's a projected timeline, but without that construction management at-risk contract in place, we are looking at potential delays. So motion came out to approve the project plan as presented in on page 29 and 30.
and direct administration to continue with the seeking the existing out, I cannot speak today. Pursuing the existing outside funding efforts and to work with CBJ and engineering to start the request proposal process for the construction manager at risk. This came out, was moved and seconded in committee, so it does not require a motion of the board.
So, as our Madam Vice President said, this came out of the planning committee, so there's an action item on the table. And right now it's time for discussion. Seeing no discussion or questions, seeing no objections, that action item is passed.
Thanks. A couple of other items and I probably mentioned it before. We are, just to let you know, you'll hear more about it. We're looking to tie our existing and future facilities master plan to our strategic goals, right? The existing facilities master plan was done independent of any strategic planning process of the hospital, but with the ambitious goals that we have approved this year, we would like to tie that together. So staff has been asked to start the process of looking at the existing projects on the facilities master plan and looking at those that will come forward from our strategic initiatives. And then we've already discussed the PAC system. The planning committee forwarded to finance for their review, and we as a board approved it this evening. Any questions?
And I see no questions, and we'll move on. Thank you very much. We're gonna go to the administration's report, and we'll start with Mr. Warden.
All right. In my letter, what I wanted to do this time was to talk about the goal of trying to take our strategic goals that you approved in November 2023 board meeting and take them into activities. And so the process which we went through, as you know, as you may recall, I asked all of the departments to do A3s. That's a document that has a specific way of looking at things. We want you to look at problem statement, scope, background, current conditions, root cause analysis, goals, KPIs, and follow-up actions. So it's a way of thinking about problems, but it's also, especially for any size facility, a really good way of turning activities into actions. So what I asked them to do, every department, come up with at least at a minimum of 3 that focus on growth, focus on improvement of quality, and also the improvement of our employee engagement. So they provided those with us. We then did the following. We took each one of the strategies, if you look at the letters, and mapped them out to an owner, a leadership owner. So seamless continuity of care, was Kim and Gail, support and development alignment of employees, providers, and partners, was Chad. Improve infrastructure to meet community needs, that's Chris Letterman. Optimize and drive strategic clinical growth, that's Joe, our CFO, and promote a distinct identity brand, which is Aaron and Dave. So what we did is we gave every one of these leaders a specific task to make sure that we are driving that. The next thing we did is we developed all the 92 A3s for each of the departments and mapped them into each one of the strategies, right? So we have 92 A3s, activity sheets, mapping into 5 strategies, okay? We then took each one of the years that we have to deal with in the strategy and decided what we were going to do in each one of those years. So 2024 was, let's sustain ourselves and recover. Let's start growing in the next following year, and let's do some future market leadership. So each one of these then had a specific priority focus. For example, cost management, lean A3s that align with activity and KPIs. How are we gonna measure performance? FTEs, margin is the big one. And then we established the visual management board. So what we've done is taken all of the strategies that you approved in, all the activities that people felt were important to meet those, map them in, give them a leader and a KPI and a time frame in which to do these things. So if you go to the next one, this is what it looks like. When you look at your strategies, you're looking at the 5 strategies, what we plan to do in each one of the 3 periods, right? So going back, our strategies disappeared. Anyways, each one of those years and each one of those strategies will have specific activities that we need to accomplish. And then, hang on. So if you can see each strategy, it has 3 periods across it. If you go into, for example, one of Joe's is, I can't read it at that level, but read this one. Strategy for implement cost controls. Okay, so he has an initiative on implementing cost controls, initiate orthopedic center of excellence. Or for example, number 3, which is Chris Letterman, and over there, conduct a comprehensive IT assessment. That's just been completed by him. Here's the assessment, right? He and his staff have gone through this, and now their job is to, fix all the things that we can fix from that assessment. So what I'm trying to say is that we have activity that are tied into strategy. We have strategy owners, and then we're actually measuring our performance on that. Go to the next slide. This gets into Joe's area. So for each one of Joe's area, he has the major strategy, which is above. Here's a priority focus, which says, implement cost controls. Then he has the lean 3. So you can see, for example, materials management has 2 A3s. And then he has KPIs, which are below, that basically say he's going to measure days, he's going to measure days of cash on hand, he's going to measure margin. So these are the easiest ones to understand simply because they relate to it. Now that we have strategies, strategy owners, activities, A3s that relate to that, KPIs, we now have to start measuring how well we're doing. Go to the next one. If you want to see what we were doing, is that downstairs, right in this hallway, and the downstairs, we go out this door, you can see the entire mapped out process that says, here's how we're going to move from the strategies that you approved to the activities to meet those strategies. I also have this up in my office, and we'll put it also in the hospital. And every month we'll be updating how well we're doing on the KPIs. So if you look at the KPIs, no, just keep it there. KPIs, which is the bottom row, we have white, a lot of white there. If you look at my office, which has just been updated today, we have some red and some green. So I can now stand with my staff and saying, okay, Gail and Kim, what are we doing in strategy number 1? How are we moving forward? Kim can bring her staff in and say, here's what we're doing on this one. Let's have a huddle around it and how we're doing on the A3s. Kim and Gail have 51, I believe 51 A3s that they have to manage. And then it goes down from there. There's a total of 92. So those are how we have moved from the things that you've asked us to do strategically to changing that into actionable items that will meet those strategic needs. This is going to take a little bit more time to discuss, so maybe I can bring it back to one of the committees or the board. But I wanted to give you some assurance that we're moving very rapidly to get to activity that improves our financial position, activity that improves our clinical quality, activity that improves our employment, engagement, activity that does seamless integration. It's especially true in the IT realm for that. And then we can all see it. So if you remember when you were a kid and you had a history test and they would post your name up on the board, they can't do that anymore. Visual management is a key tool to make sure people are aligning, people are holding each other accountable for what they've already agreed to. Right? We didn't come up with the 92. We asked them to come up with the 92. So these are things that our leaders agreed to do because they felt it was most important to be growth, quality, and employee engagement. So we now can hold them accountable and ourselves accountable. So every month, these will be updated. Then we will be looking at when we finish with 1A3s, complete the whole thing, what are we going to add back on? So we're going to be trying to make sure that we have focus and momentum, because what this does for you as a leader is it focuses you on the important but not urgent versus the unimportant and urgent that tends to fill up a lot of things. So I'll end here on that, but you'll see more of this to come. You want to go by and see it, just go downstairs, it's right there, and you'll start seeing it in the hospital. So anyways, I want to thank everyone for working on that. Community relations, we have a specialized care within reach program that's being launched under Aaron's leadership. You know, Aaron and Nate are part of that strategy number 5 that includes the promote a distinct identity and brand. So she's already taking some concrete steps to work on and to showcase our commitment to excellence, highlight specific service lines. And I talked about how do we drive business into the hospital using our digital work, how to increase patient engagement and enhance our brand recognition. Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I might not suggest this, but.
No, that's okay. It's the reports there to read.
All right. So I'm really excited about that. Even more excited about the next thing that that's been coming under our ken. One of our major cost issues is how many employees we get that are travelers. It's about a 30 to 40% increase in cost. At the same time, they may not know our system, may not know docs, they don't know, you know, all the quality metrics. So they're many times they're coming in cold and they're not as effective as a longer term employee. And then of course, then they leave. So one of the things that we started was let's grow our own. So they focused on 2 programs. One is the licensed practical nurse and graduates will be placed throughout the organization. And also, what's the other one? CNAs, sorry. CNA programs. Almost all of those. How many were there, Kim? CNAs?
Oh, gosh, we sent, I think there was a total of 8, and then the next class was gonna be 12 or 16.
Right. And then they're mostly going over to Wildflower Court, where we have a lot of travelers to reduce that cost. So this is a program that started way before I did, but it is the right program. Grow our own, encourage students to come here and work with us, and hopefully we can maintain a high level of that. But that's a really important program that I think we all should be proud of. I'll let the next one is really HR. You can look at the major initiatives of that, including reduction of contract staff. But really, the big project right now is CEO search and union negotiations, which I might be able to discuss at the chance. So I'll end my report here and see if there's any questions.
I just want to say one thing that's a comment for LPL with the program. I've had employees, you know, in my business that are graduating high school that are going to go into this program, and they're super excited. So this is just kind of.
Yeah, we're really excited to have them with us, and they're super excited. Their graduation was amazing, and we have ADM students coming through too. So it's a real exciting time for Bartlett and Alaska Pacific University. is gonna start looking at an LPN to RN bridge program. And then with that program, they have to be an LPN before they go into that. So you see a lot of our own employees from all different aspects of areas going into those programs, coming out as a nurse, they've gone in as EBS, CNA, and as LPN. So it's really great to be able to see them grow throughout the organization and be excited and on fire for nursing and patient care. So it's really good.
Yeah.
That's kind of an important question, but the LPN to RN program, what do they come out with? The 2-year RN or 4-year?
2-year.
Ian, did you want to continue or?
No, I'll let, I think I'm done. I think Kim is next.
Thank you. In my report, I can actually tag on to Mr. Warden's report, which has demonstrated through a graph our decrease in contracted labor costs at Wildflower Court. They continue to drop. I am expecting that by the 1st of August or when the summer CNA group leaves, we should be basically about through with contracted CNAs, which is a huge expense to Wildflower Court. But our actual volume of residents is also lower right now. So I might need to include that into this discussion. Today, we have 45 residents. We have 3 more admissions to take this week, so we will be up to about 48 by the end of the day Friday, and we have 6 pending admissions. Some of them I am holding off on primarily because we do have a small COVID outbreak going on in Wildflower Court, which Kim spoke to earlier. That just hit the end of last week, and our infection preventionist with Bartlett is on top of it. So I'm not sure how that began, but anyway, it got there and it spread quickly as it would in a long-term care facility. The home health census is at 16 with 4 pending admissions. Hospice census is at 6 today. We've had a couple of deaths in the past few days. And our average length of stay on hospice is at 47. So our length of stay is improving quickly. Let's see, one of the things that I wanted to kind of inform you about, I think it was in about March or April, I discussed the new rules that CMS was putting into place as it relates to a federal staffing mandate for long-term care facilities. And as of May 24th, it was implemented on May the 1st. We had to start meeting those staffing requirements. The American Healthcare Association, joined by the Texas Healthcare Association and several Texas long-term care facilities and organizations, filed a lawsuit just this past Thursday, basically stating that CMS, against CMS for exceeding their statutory authority and arbitrarily and capriciously issuing the minimum staffing standards for long-term care facilities. The lawsuit asked that the court issue an order and judgment setting aside the new staffing requirements that were finalized by CMS on May 10th. So I said May 1st, okay, it's May 10th, sorry about that. So we'll see how this pans out, but we already have staffing regulations imposed in long-term care as it is. Right, and they're trying to increase those at a time when there's a major shortage of licensed nurses throughout the United States. And it's going to impact long-term care facilities' ability to admit residents if they implement this. And they have implemented, but if it continues to move forward, right now, there's a waiting period that facilities have in order to reach that staffing requirement. So the positive note, Wildflower Court, we do meet the minimum staffing standards on about probably 90% of the time. There are times maybe I don't have an RN 24/7. I may have an LPN. LPNs instead, but for the most part, we do. That also increase our cost whenever you have more RNs and you're staffing more RNs versus LPNs. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, but we'll see how that lawsuit pans out. Other than that, I don't think that I have anything else unless you have some questions related to my report.
Anybody got any questions for Kim? Anybody online? Thank you, Kim. All right, so Mr. Palmer is not on, so we're not going to get a legal report from Mr. Palmer. So we're just going to go right on to Maria, Executive Director.
So the big activity with the foundation now is the Edelman scholarships. They're due on the 31st. We have quite a few applications and we're compiling those. We go over to the scholarship committee for review next week. And want to highlight that this Edelman scholarship, it's in direct support to the Grow Your Own program. We have quite a few Bartlett nurses that apply for scholarships through the Edelman for their studies, and they come, they're here, so it's what the scholarship is for, to enhance healthcare providers in Southeast Alaska. So that works quite well. We're very happy with that, and we anticipate to award $30,000 in scholarships this year. So stay tuned. Also want to say that we have scheduled a wildlife cruise for Saturday, June 15th, and I'll send out another email about that. There's lots of tickets available, so we kind of hope to fill the boat. Let's see what else. The other thing I wanted to bring attention, and it's not in the report, is that Kim McDowell and I have initiated conversations with CBJ Tourism Manager regarding the impacts of the visitor industry on Bartlett Regional Hospital, and we anticipate the conversation to continue. It had been positive, and now it's busy and it's kind of stalled, but we will be getting back with them and more to come on that as well. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? But before we go to Wade, I'm going to ask our Madam Vice President to extend the meeting.
I move that the board extend the meeting beyond 8:30 for an additional 30 minutes to 9 o'clock.
Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing no objections, we're extending till 9 o'clock. Mr. Bryce?
Don't object, as I was saying, Mr. Saunders. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I really had was that we have just completed our budget cycle as I was listening to your guys' presentation about how much money or how much subsidies Bartlett could use. The good news that I do have is that Mayor Weldon did return to the assembly. She was there with us for the final finance budget meeting, so it's really nice to see the mayor. I did reach out to the deputy manager and said, what do I need to communicate with the group as you guys are getting ready to go communicate to the assembly? He said, show the presentation that we all sat here and watched. The manager and the city and the deputy manager, both of that was very helpful information. It's the exact thing that the assembly is going to look for. I was rather relieved that I saw that you guys were wanting to slow this process down and you weren't trying to do something in this budget cycle, as we just finished. We just agreed on the budget and picked a mill rate of 10.04. To fix some of these things, it would take a mill rate adjustment to correct the ship, as Mr. Mertz was referring to. So if there are things that are going to require CBJ subsidy, the majority of the community is asking us to reduce the taxes, reduce property tax, not raise it. So if there are real things that Bartlett's going to need in terms of like real mill rates to be able to continue funding very important things that you guys are doing, you're gonna have to reach out to both assembly members and talk to them and in preparation for next year's budget cycle. But you also need community members on board, because right now the community really tells us reduce the mill rate. I mean, that was the message that we got. And what I saw in here tonight is that, and I was counting up like maybe 0.3 mils to fix Bartlett's problems. And we just spent like 3 years trying to drop it 3 mils. So as these problems or these solutions progress, you'll not only need to have really good communication with your assembly members that you talk to and the city manager, because next year the changes to Bartlett or the needs of Bartlett are going to impact the mill rate. That's the only outcome that I see from the direction you guys are going and the direction of the assembly's going. So show this presentation. This was the best information that the assembly needs, and it'll help us make those decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
So tomorrow when we present this to the assembly, we'll do this in a little shorter fashion, because I really want our board members to talk to the assembly too. And I can't agree with you more how it's so important that I know that we say that one of the things that you said was Bartlett's problem. This is really our community, and this is our community. If our community says that we want the mill rate reduced, that the community is choosing not to have services all over our community, not just Bartlett, but everywhere too. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that, you know.
Mr. Chair, that's the message that we communicate back every time somebody says, well, you need to cut something, and the simple response to that is, what would you like for me to cut? What program do you use that you would like for me to cut? Because if you tell me somebody else's program, that's not gonna happen. Sure, spot on, sir.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Bryson? Thank you. All right. So my report is pretty much, we've been working on this part of the budget cycle, and I've sat in lots of meetings with Joe and Ian, done just an excellent job. Vice President has filled in for me. I was gone last week. I had a family emergency, so I was out of town, and Deb, thank you very much for filling in for me. And I know that we all feel very fortunate that we're going to be able to reach out to the community and hear what the community has to say next month about what services they really want Bartlett to continue, and again, what the community really wants to support us. So that, I don't really have that much to say besides that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Aaron, look at these.
Oh, sorry, Aaron. Thank you. So this is information update to the board regarding the proposed community feedback form planned for early in June. It's a proposal of these special board meetings to hear public comment on the community healthcare priorities and non-core hospital program. So a lot of information in here. I'm not going to read this. This is in the packet. And again, I think we've expressed this in different terms, and Aaron, thank you so much. I went over the timeline completely with everybody that's in here. Looking forward to making sure that we have public comment through May 29th through the 19th through a designated webpage that Aaron has set up, and all comments received during the window will be compiled and included in the public packet for the 25th board meeting. Again, the community feedback forum is planned for Tuesday, June 4th and Monday, June 10th at 5:30 p.m. on the hospital campus. There's going to be a virtual participation option that'll be available for those sessions. Is this gonna be, this is gonna be on our website as well as the website too, correct?
I can guarantee it'll be on the hospital's website. I can certainly reach out to the CBJ's PIO to see what would be appropriate to add to the city's page as well for publicity. They're usually generally very supportive of cross-posting information.
So again, just the background, and I know it's in the packet, but I just want to make sure that I say this again, that Bartlett Regional Hospitals continues to face operating losses at unsustainable levels. This situation requires significant changes to the core hospital operations and to the community. Decisions on non-core services to ensure Bartlett remains independent and achieves long-term stability. So over the last several years, Bartlett has added several ancillary and public health programs alongside its core services. These important community programs have been cross-subsidized by the hospital for several years, largely due to insignificant state and federal funding. That's led to low reimbursement rates. A thorough review of each of these programs was presented to the Finance Committee, which everybody has seen now too, and on May 10th, and the Board of Directors on May 28th with the proposed recommendations. The board is given direction that it wishes to open a formal period of public comment on community healthcare priorities and non-core hospital programs. The public will be able to provide comment to the board and the community feedback, and we already talked about that. So thank you very much. So this is an action item?
No.
No, this is just some information. So this is an informational update, and action will be taken under the adoption of the calendar.
We know when this informational meeting will be held.
Yeah, they're gonna be here.
This one?
Here's
Downstairs.
the option.
Okay.
Open up the whole.
Okay, thank you.
We'll have overflow up here, is that correct, Erin? So with that, we're gonna go right to the calendar. So the first meeting is planning on the 7th. Any issues with that? No. Oh, jeez, I'm so sorry. Sarah. The special board meeting, okay, so each of the meetings that are going to be the informational meetings will be board of directors meetings. So the first one will be on the 4th at 5:30, the community feedback meeting. Then after that, on June 7th, we'll go to the planning committee meeting. On the 10th, our next community forum, another 5:30 special board meeting. Again, those will all be here at Bartlett. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the room here. I think most of us are fathers. I know. The 24th, Monday, the 24th, the day before our board meeting, we'll have our finance committee meeting, and then on the 25th, special board of directors. All right, can you make a motion for the calendar?
Mr. Chairman, we're overdue for a compliance committee meeting, but I haven't been able to get hold of Gail, so I'm going to ask committee members if we can just put that up one more month. We'll have to catch up towards the end of the year.
Sure. So Gail's out of the country right now, so I think she'll be back.
I thought she was going to be back now, but she's not. The other thing is I have jury duty during the month of June, so I'm just getting a little bit worried looking at the planning committee. These other important meetings too. So if I'm not here, that means some jury.
We can probably be flexible.
Well, then you don't know about this until the day before.
He's on planning. Thank you, Hal. Lisa, did you have any governance meetings?
I was waiting because we were going to do the board retreat first. And I am going out of town on Wednesday. I'll be gone for 6 weeks.
So you get a motion for this calendar?
Chairman, I move.
Second.
Seeing no objections, the calendar is approved. Now is the time for board comments and questions. Board have any comments or questions?
Well, I guess I'll just make a comment. I just express my appreciation for all the work, the analysis that we talked about today. And I mean, obviously, it would have been a lot of work even if it wasn't done as well. It was done so well, and I think the public understood it. So it's just going to be, I think, presented to the assembly in a way that's really interesting. Just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big team effort.
Lisa.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that too. What was really good was pointing out how we got to this situation, because a lot of people, I think, in the community think that we're just willy-nilly wanting to cut programs. Thinking that it's something arbitrary that we're doing and not really understanding that there hasn't been a revenue for it, and that the hospital has taken on the burden of basically subsidizing all these programs and that is, as you said, we need to look for other ways to pay for it to make it fair.
Anybody else? Okay, with that being said, we will take a quick 1-minute break, and then we come back, we'll have I'll take us into executive session. Go ahead, let's take us into executive session.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital recess into executive session to discuss several matters, including those which by law, municipal charter, or ordinance are required to be confidential, or involve consideration of records that are not subject to public disclosure, specifically the credentialing report, medical staff meeting minutes, patient safety dashboard, union negotiations, and personnel matters, or to discuss possible Bartlett Regional Hospital litigation, specifically candid discussion of facts and litigation strategies, Bartlett Regional Hospital and city attorneys. And Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that you choose which staff you think should be retained.
Thank you, Al.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. Okay, seeing no objections, we'll go into executive session. Everybody that's here that's not a staff member, we'll put into a waiting room. We'll keep the staff in here until this point, and then we'll move forward with the next segment as we go through the progressive of executive session of who needs to be in. Reminder.
Jim, Joe, Kenny, Nate, Kelly. Yeah. Nate, ready? Yeah.
He was helping.
All right, reminder for people that are online, make sure that no one can hear your conversations or your private room. That will start the credentialing report of the Dr. Session. How you'll take us out of the credentialing, and then also giving the CEO or the human resource guy and the president permission to work with the.
And we have to approve the additional extension.
And the extension of time. Correct.
For Ian's.
For Ian's contract.
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, I move that we come out of executive session.
Hey, we are going to be out of executive session.
Could you let me know when I want to talk?
Okay. I wanted to make sure.
Okay.
All right, would you like to move some more stuff, Mr. David?
Yes, I move that we accept the credentialing report.
I see no objections, credential report is accepted.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board authorize you and the HR to work together to develop an updated contract for Mr. Wood.
So that's not an action item, so it's just giving the direction.
Okay.
Okay. And then we have another item, Deb, you could do.
I move that we extend the board meeting for another, I'm gonna say another hour. We'll be leaving early. For another hour until 10 o'clock.
It's the sunny side of the street. Right, second that motion.
No objections. Board meeting has been extended for another hour. With that being said, we are done with our business.
It's just, I mean, these are.